Right now, down on the Gulf Coast of the United States, the federal government is actively melting massive underground salt caverns, and they are doing it entirely on purpose just to keep your gas prices down.
It is such a stark visual for how the global economy is functioning. As of today, August 17th, 2026, we rarely think about the physical or structural limits holding up our daily lives until we realize the literal foundation under our feet is quietly washing away.
And the invisible systems we rely on, whether we are talking about physical oil storage or the digital networks that make our online transactions feel completely free, they're all suddenly hitting these absolute breaking points.
Which is largely because the era of free money is definitively over. If you look at the bond market, the 30-year Treasury yield just topped 5.31%, hitting a level we have not seen since June 2007. Capital is just incredibly expensive right now.
Whether you are managing a retirement portfolio, running a small business, or just, wondering why every digital service you use is suddenly changing its rules, we're looking at a market where nothing operates without a cost anymore. Every system has a hidden structural limit that eventually demands payment.
The most glaring example of a system hitting that limit is happening in India right now. Over the last decade, they built what is arguably the world's biggest digital payments miracle. It is called the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI.
To give you a sense of scale on that, in July alone, UPI processed 23.6 billion transactions. It operates with essentially zero friction. You buy vegetables from a street vendor, scan a printed QR code, and the money moves instantly from your bank to theirs.
No card terminal required, and crucially, there is no visible fee for the user or the merchant. That lack of friction is the entire superpower of the system, but the bill for running it is finally coming due.
The Indian government and the central bank are actively looking at proposals to start charging a merchant discount rate, an MDR, of 0.3 to 0.5% on larger transactions. We are talking about a network that handles over $313 billion in a single month.
Servers cost money, fraud prevention costs money, and cybersecurity requires massive ongoing investment. The tension here is fundamentally between treating a digital network as a public utility versus maintaining sustainable business economics.
For years, the Indian government heavily subsidized the banks to compensate them for operating that UPI infrastructure. The Reserve Bank of India governor recently stated plainly that those subsidies are no longer enough, meaning someone has to pay the actual cost of the system.
The current proposal targets transactions above roughly $24 at larger merchants. Brokerage firm Jefferies notes those larger transactions only make up 4% of the volume, but they account for 67% of the total monetary value moving through the system.
Targeting that top tier seems completely logical from a banking perspective. But economists are warning about a massive behavioral risk here. The merchant network was not just a lucky byproduct of UPI. That zero-fee structure actively drove the massive public adoption.
If you introduce fees, even just on the larger transactions, you risk fundamentally changing those merchant incentives. You introduce friction into a machine that only works because it feels frictionless, and that end of frictionless tech extends far beyond transaction fees in India.
It is rewriting the architecture of the global attention economy. Look at Meta. They are facing a sprawling trial in California right now, part of a massive lawsuit involving 30 states, and the potential judgments could reach $200 billion.
The monetary fine is almost a distraction in that case. The states are not just asking for a cash settlement, they are demanding an end to features like the infinite scroll and like counts.
Think about how a platform like Instagram is designed. It functions like a massive Las Vegas casino buffet where the plates never empty, and there are no clocks on the walls or exit signs to remind you how long you have been sitting there.
If a judge forces them to turn on the lights and remove those dopamine hits, the core ad revenue engine essentially stalls. The legal filings explicitly target those specific features, labeling them engagement-optimized algorithms.
Wall Street analysts seem to be completely mispricing this existential risk, and the market is entirely distracted by Meta's massive capital expenditures for artificial intelligence infrastructure. But New Mexico's Attorney General recently won a judgment against Meta that forced real changes to age verification.
California's legal reach is much wider and much more aggressive. If Meta is forced to fundamentally alter its recommendation algorithms nationwide, the very foundation of its $1.5 trillion valuation shifts.
It is wild to see the monetization of human attention being dismantled in the courts while simultaneously being leveraged in the strangest places. The number one paid app on Apple's UK charts right now is not some blockbuster title like Minecraft.
It's a mobile game called No 10, Full Confidence, developed by a single creator in Manchester. Players take on the role of the British Prime Minister and have to balance the competing, often impossible demands of the cabinet, the media, backbenchers, and the public.
With the real-world churn of 5 UK prime ministers since 2016, a developer managed to successfully monetize the friction and chaos of Westminster politics. They took the structural limits of modern governance and turned them into an entertainment loop.
Meanwhile, big tech companies like Meta are spending billions on AI infrastructure to survive in this new era. But the scale of capital required to build out artificial intelligence is breaking historical financial models.
Anthropic, the AI company behind the Claude model, saw its annualized revenue run rate hit $65 billion in July. That staggering figure drove a $965 billion valuation.
Supporting that velocity of growth requires an absolute ocean of capital to build physical data centers. NVIDIA just entered into a $500 billion financing initiative, partnered with private equity giants like KKR and Apollo.
To make a financing pool of that size work, the tech and finance sectors needed a massive regulatory green light, and they actually got it from the Securities and Exchange Commission last month. The SEC issued guidance exempting certain data center debt from the Dodd-Frank risk retention rules.
Let's translate the mechanics of that. Dodd-Frank was put in place after the 2008 financial crisis, specifically to prevent the unchecked securitization of poorly underwritten residential mortgages.
The SEC is essentially deciding that server farms are not self-liquidating assets. A self-liquidating asset is something that pays for itself over time, like a mortgage where the house is the collateral and the homeowner's monthly payments covered the debt.
Are we essentially securitizing NVIDIA's compute power without the safeguards built to stop the last global meltdown? Securitization attorneys note this specific SEC staff opinion allows the financial sponsors to push down the required equity they have to hold in the deal.
By lowering the equity requirement, the financing becomes much more flexible and capital efficient. The tech industry is highly motivated to create innovative ways to securitize data center revenues because it frees up hundreds of billions of dollars to rapidly lay concrete and run fiber optics.
But it unquestionably shifts the risk profile of the broader financial system onto these new tech assets. So while the SEC is giving AI data centers a regulatory fast track, traditional physical infrastructure is choking on bottlenecks.
Virgin just secured regulatory track access from the Office of Rail and Road to challenge Eurostar's monopoly on the Channel Tunnel by 2030. But getting permission to run trains is just the first step.
They still need to secure 12 high-speed trains from Alstom, requiring massive, heavy capital investment. And the contrast in how fast capital can move is even more stark when you look at UK real estate.
New national planning policy framework rules are taking effect that make it significantly harder to convert struggling, unprofitable pubs into housing. Developers now have to prove there is no reasonable prospect of keeping the pub running as a business,
which includes a mandatory 12-month public marketing period. Industry groups point out that high taxes and rising operating costs are what actually kill these pubs in the first place.
The new planning rules essentially trap the owners and developers in regulatory real estate limbo. You cannot run a profitable pub because the tax burden is too high, but you are blocked from converting the physical building into housing for at least a year.
The building becomes a frozen asset purely because of regulatory friction. And it is not just government regulation that creates a frozen asset. Sometimes the friction is entirely behavioral.
There is a concept in economics known as the loyalty tax, and it costs consumers billions of dollars a year in lost returns. Speaking of making a smart switch without the friction, you can find financial candy, brain candy, and classic audiobooks at clarineratio.com.
Looking at how that inertia plays out in the real world, banks in the UK are currently offering cash bonuses of roughly $295 just to switch your checking account over to them.
Despite someone offering to hand you nearly $300 for an hour of paperwork, British savers lose approximately $16 billion annually in missed interest simply because of inertia. Almost 2/3 of savers have kept their cash parked with the exact same bank for over a decade.
Financial Conduct Authority data shows that banks actively rely on this consumer inertia. They offer highly competitive, high-yield rates to acquire new deposits, while their legacy customers remain parked in accounts yielding significantly lower returns.
The friction of moving direct debits, Updating subscription payment details and learning a new app interface acts as an invisible moat for the bank's profit margins. It is a moat built entirely out of our own reluctance to do paperwork.
But there are companies that actively monetize a completely different, much more passionate kind of loyalty. Disney is pouring $60 billion into its theme parks over the next decade.
At the recent expo, they did not just announce massive new intellectual property expansions, they announced they are finally fixing the broken Disco Yeti animatronic at the Animal Kingdom in Florida.
That Yeti has been operating in a strobe-lit stationary B mode since 2006. Prioritizing the repair of an 18-year-old broken robot signals a very specific strategic shift for the company.
Disney's Experiences division just posted a record $10 billion in quarterly revenue. They realized that while massive new roller coasters attract infrequent international visitors, it is the annual pass holders, the loyal superfans, who sustain the profit margins during macroeconomic uncertainty.
Fixing a beloved niche attraction is a highly targeted retention strategy for the people who visit 20 times a year. And at the absolute extreme end of brand loyalty, Ferrari just auctioned off its very first electric vehicle, the Luce.
They sold it for a record-breaking $40 million, and this occurred right amid massive vocal backlash from Ferrari purists who claimed an EV completely destroys the brand's heritage.
A $40 million price tag proves that ultimate luxury brands can extract staggering premiums from their loyalists, even when pivoting away from their core internal combustion identity.
Consumers clearly pay a tax for their inertia, but corporations pay an incredibly steep literal price for stalling. Look at the Paramount-Skydance merger with Warner Bros. Discovery.
A dozen state attorneys general are suing to block that $110 billion deal on antitrust grounds, potentially delaying the close all the way to June 2027. Because of that delay, Paramount is demanding a $1.88 billion bond from those states.
The contractual mechanism driving this demand is called a ticking fee. Under their merger agreement, because the deal is delayed past a September 30th deadline, Paramount is contractually obligated to pay Warner Bros. Shareholders an additional 25 cents per share every single quarter the deal remains in limbo.
Doing the math on that, the ticking fee translates to roughly $650 million bleeding off Paramount's balance sheet every 3 months they sit around waiting for antitrust clearance.
M&A contracts include these fees to incentivize buyers to clear regulatory hurdles quickly and to compensate the seller's shareholders for market risk. A frozen merger is not just paused on a desk, it is actively burning hundreds of millions of dollars in cash.
Time literally costs money in corporate finance, which brings us right back to the macro environment and that 5.31% Treasury yield we discussed earlier.
The incredibly high cost of borrowing is directly tied to the massive U.S. budget deficit, which is putting immense structural pressure on federal benefits. We are looking at a looming Social Security funding cliff in 2032.
The political landscape around fixing that cliff is shifting rapidly. Representative John Larson, who was the primary champion of the Social Security 2100 Act, just lost his primary in Connecticut.
His bill proposed expanding benefits by taxing investment income over $400,000. His exit creates a massive legislative vacuum for how to address the impending trust fund depletion.
Analysts project that depletion could result in a 24% across-the-board benefit cut for retirees if left unaddressed. Simultaneously, Senator Bernie Sanders is pitching the Stop Social Security Garnishment Act.
Right now, nearly 1 in 4 federal student loan borrowers are at risk of default. Current law allows the government to seize a portion of their Social Security checks to cover those unpaid student loans.
The mechanics of that are incredibly circular. You have the federal government physically garnishing its own distributed benefit payments just to satisfy a debt owed to a different arm of the same federal government.
All of this is happening while the underlying trust fund financing the benefit is projected to run short. It is a closed loop of federal obligations colliding with demographic reality.
While domestic policy remains gridlocked, the global geopolitical board is violently shaking the private sector. In the pharmaceutical space, market dominance is flipping rapidly.
Eli Lilly's oral GLP-1 drug Foundayo is gaining massive market share, with prescriptions up 14% week over week. It is aggressively overtaking Novo Nordisk's oral Wegovy, which saw a 5% drop in the same period.
We are also seeing targeted, physical disruptions to national economies. Ukraine recently struck a major logistics hub near Moscow belonging to Wildberries.
Wildberries is effectively the Amazon of Russia, and its marketplace accounts for roughly 3% of Russia's total gross domestic product. Taking out a massive distribution center is a direct physical hit to their internal economic flow.
Amid all this volatility, smart capital is migrating to unexploited safe havens. Billionaire Peter Thiel just disclosed a $76 million stake in Vista Energy, an independent shale oil producer operating in Argentina.
He is personally meeting with Argentine leadership who are aggressively deregulating their natural resources, specifically to attract this kind of foreign capital flight.
Which brings us back to the most striking physical manifestation of market mechanics in the world right now, and the story we opened with. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
The SPR has dropped below 300 million barrels to roughly 243 million. The physical reality of how we store that oil is wild. It is not sitting in massive steel tanks above ground.
It is stored thousands of feet underground in 60 massive salt caverns along the Gulf Coast. To extract the oil rapidly during a crisis, operators have to pump fresh water into the bottom of the cavern, which pushes the crude oil up to the surface.
The engineering consequence of that mechanism is that the fresh water actively dissolves the salt walls of the cavern. Every single time the government executes a rapid drawdown to suppress gas prices, we are physically melting the storage infrastructure.
Petroleum engineers are warning that dropping below 300 million barrels thins the salt pillars separating adjacent caverns, greatly increasing the risk of structural cave-ins.
We are literally eroding our physical capacity to manage future crises in order to suppress current market prices. The deadline for an Iran peace deal is expiring today, which is pushing global crude prices up.
Because of these geopolitical risks and the tight physical supply constraints, the refiner stocks companies like Marathon and Valero have surged over 80% this year.
The financial market heavily rewards the companies positioned at the bottleneck of a constrained system. The margin between buying raw crude oil and selling the refined gas products, known as the crack spread, hit near $60 a barrel recently.
To put that in perspective, the historical average for the prior decade was around $19. When we synthesize today's developments, a very clear pattern emerges.
Every financial system, whether it is the digital code of India's free payment network, the algorithmic engagement loop of social media, or a hollowed-out salt dome in Louisiana, relies on hidden structural limits.
And eventually, whether through friction, fees, or physical degradation, those limits demand payment. Whether it is the $16 billion loyalty tax paid by inert bank customers or a $650 million quarterly ticking fee on a frozen merger, friction always carries a massive price tag.
We spent the last 15 years in a low-interest rate environment where those structural costs could be subsidized, deferred, or completely ignored. But at a 5.31% Treasury yield, the structural realities aggressively reassert themselves.
If the SEC is actively treating data center debt like the new mortgage-backed security, and governments are physically melting their oil storage caverns to artificially hold down inflation today, it forces a broader evaluation of risk.
Which leaves us with a final question for you to consider. What invisible foundation of your own portfolio, your business, or your daily life is quietly dissolving right now? Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the hidden mechanics running the world. Keep questioning the foundations.